Mikhail Tal changed chess forever with this game. This is game one of his world championship against Mikhail Botvinnik. And as you may know, Botvinnik was an advocate of the scientific approach to chess, always looking for absolute truths and perfect opportunities. And Tal came into that environment and just said, I'm going to blow things up. I'm going to just play crazy chess, play complex lines. I'm going to play the opponent instead of the board. And he challenged this scientific approach to chess in this world championship match, which a match he did, of course, as you know, eventually win. So this first game is sort of a declaration that the world of chess is going to be changing from this point forward. Tal has the white pieces, Botvinnik has black. Let us jump right in. E4, E6. Botvinnik plays the French defense. D4, D5, knight to C3, and bishop to B4. So we have a very unbalanced opening here. The winnower system in the French defense, where black wrecks white's pawn structure, but gives up a very key minor piece, that dark squared bishop, in order to do it. White gains space. C5 attacking the base of the pawn chain. A3 asks the bishop what it wants to do, and Botvinnik plays the main move, which is to take the knight with check. Pawn takes, and we see here white has space, but also has weaknesses at C3 and C2. And here Botvinnik plays queen to C7. It's more usual to see knight to E7 here. But there's a very interesting idea behind queen to C7. First of all, the queen usually ends up on this square anyway, because he wants to put pressure down the C file, and particularly hit this C3 pawn and square where it delivers check and attacks the rook at A1. But the idea is, after white's next move, queen to G4, attacking the weak G7 pawn, Botvinnik is able to play this move, F5, and the queen at C7 defends the G7 pawn laterally. White does not want to take that pawn en passant. Not only does he give up his nice space advantage, but after knight takes F6, attacking the queen, black has very active pieces. So instead, Tal plays queen to G3, just keeping pressure on that G7 pawn. But here Botvinnik plays knight to E7. He's going to allow Tal to take that G7 pawn, but he's hoping for attacking prospects in return. So queen G7, rook to G8, queen takes H7. And this is all fairly standard in the French winnower. But here this next move is key for black, CD4. Basically, he's opening up this queen down the C file, and at the moment threatening queen takes C3 check with a double attack on the king and the rook. So how does Tal deal with this? It would be normal to play a move like knight to E2, which would, so the queen can't get to C3 and black would take with the pawn and you get fairly standard positions. But instead Tal plays king to D1. Well, what are his thoughts here? I mean, to move the king, give up castling rights with the king in the center of the board. What's his thought? Well, he would rather play the knight to F3 than E2. Because on E2, it's not as aggressively posted, and it also blocks in his bishop, and he's removing the king from any checks on C3. He also knows that if he were to castle kingside, black would have these G and H files, and his king wouldn't be safe castled anyway. So he decides to take his chances with his king in the middle of the board. Bishop to D7, getting developed for black. Black, of course, would like to just play knight to C6, castle long, and be safe and attack down the G and H files. But here, if knight to F3, black could play bishop to A4. And this is a pretty strong move, attacking C2, pinning that pawn, because of a move like bishop to D3 would actually lose. After queen takes C3, he's attacking the rook at A1 and also threatening queen takes bishop because the pawn is pinned. So he can't play knight to F3 here. If knight to A2, then bishop to A4, and black is threatening D3, taking advantage of the pin on this pawn. So first, Tal plays queen to H5 check. Botvinnik blocks with a knight. He'd rather not move the king. He wants to preserve the possibility of castling long. Now, Tal ends up going to E2 anyway, but in this case, it's to put pressure on this now pinned knight on G6. So there's a very specific reason to go there. If black plays a natural move here, like king to F7, the knight to F4, and white has sort of some aggressive possibilities. He can play G4, opening up this diagonal for the bishop from D3. And that would be a pretty strong idea. I mean, black could survive it, but he'd be under a lot of pressure the whole way through. Bishop to a4, knight to f4, queen c3, bishop to d3, and after queen takes a1, white would get a knight for the rook and have a very nice attack after knight c6, knight to f4 check. Black would be in serious trouble because white is also threatening the pawn on e6 here. If king to e7, then just check, forcing the king back, then knight takes pawn, and that would be over soon. Excuse me. And if king to d8, king to d7, and queen f7 check, I should say. And white comes in and cleans up. So because of that, Botvinnik plays the move d3. Now what he's doing is he's throwing away this pawn, but he's opening up this diagonal, this a4, d1 diagonal, leading right at Tal's king. He takes it, then bishop to a4 check, king to e1, and queen to e5. And Botvinnik looks like he's getting some decent counterplay himself. He has a pin on the knight. He's putting some pressure on c3. Tal plays bishop to g5. What this does, of course, is by covering the d8 square, Botvinnik cannot castle. So he wants to keep that king in the center of the board, just as his own king is in the center of the board. Knight c6 from black. Botvinnik would love to play d4 here and just open up this position. And obviously, if he took, the knight could take. And yeah, the d4 would be very powerful for black. So Tal plays d4 first to prevent black from doing that. The queen goes back to c7. And now h4. He has an extra pawn. It's a passed pawn on the h-file. So he begins to advance that pawn. And also he is able to activate his rook via the h3 square. It could go to g3, it could go to e3. So he's activating his pieces. Botvinnik plays e5. Again, trying to open up lines against the king at e1. Rook to h3. Queen to f7. Removing the pin from the knight at g6. Pawn takes, knight c to e5, and now rook to e3. Hitting the knight, and notice because of this bishop at g5, black still cannot castle long. That's very important. So what Botvinnik does, he plays king to d7, and he steps out of the pin in that way and hopes to activate his rook and get it involved in the position. Rook to b1, attacking the b7 pawn and getting the rook to a half-open file, b6 to defend that pawn. Knight to f4, adding to the pressure on the g6 pawn. Rook a to e8 was played in the game. If knight takes f4, queen f7, check knight f7, bishop f4, Tal would have a crushing position, really, with the bishop pair and this extra h-pawn. White is just really has a winning advantage for players of that level. So rook a to e8, rook to b4, activating the rook and attacking that bishop at a4. The bishop moves to c6. And now here's Tal's main strategic goal here. He wants to get at this king at d7, and he comes up with a very creative solution. First, he plays the queen back to d1, moves the queen to its original square, those are hard moves to make. You know, backward moves are some of the hardest moves to see in chess, but he's pinning this d-pawn, and he wants to play c4 and pry open that central position. Knight takes f4 from black, rook takes f4, knight to g6 hits the rook goes to d4, and notice how he's still focused on this lever, this c-pawn. This is the powerful idea from white. Rook takes e3, and he goes ahead and takes with the pawn. This way he has absolute control over this f4 square. The bishop, the rook, and the pawn have complete control over f4, making it hard, if not impossible, for black to open up that line of attack. The king goes to c7, and now Tal plays his key lever, c4, opening up that central position. Pawn takes, bishop takes, and we see there is a skewer on this diagonal. The alternative, of course, was to just let Tal play pawn takes himself, and that would have been crushing. Bishop c4, queen to g7, bishop takes rook, queen takes bishop, and now Tal is up an exchange and a pawn. And after his next move, h5, attacking the knight and also advancing his strategically advantageous h-pawn, Botvinnik resigned. A potential follow-up. Notice the knight has no comfortable place to go. If it goes to e5, the bishop will come back and pin it. So it would actually have to retreat to h8 here. and then just check. And he could even give back the exchange and have a very strong, completely winning endgame. After king to f2, there's just nothing to be done to stop the advance of this pawn. The bishop can go to e5, controlling the queening square, and that would be it. And this was a declaration by Tal that the game of chess has a lot more play in it than people thought. This isn't a scientific game. This is a game of artistry. I hope you've enjoyed this masterpiece. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.